When I was in my 20s, I was a huge fan of being outdoors. Camping and hiking, I'd try and get away a few weekends every month. I worked in construction, so it was nice to get away from all the noise. I had friends who liked to hunt, but that wasn't something I really liked. I was into shooting, just shooting with a camera, not a gun. I was living in New Hampshire for the summer, south of the White Mountains, so that's where I'd usually go for quick trips. The trails were on the quieter side, and you'd generally see tons of animals and birds. It was easy to find animals to photograph, but my skills really needed practice, and animals moved pretty fast. I spent a lot of time in those woods, and sometimes I felt like I wasn't the only thing watching. Sometimes woods are just creepy, even in the daytime. There were definitely times when I thought I'd see something move out of the corner of my eye, but then I'd look and there'd really be nothing there. It's just a deer, I'd think to myself, or you're just imagining things. As the summer months wore on, my photography skills did get better. As fall crept in, construction was winding down for the season, and the cold night air let me know I didn't have many more comfortable camping nights ahead. I was planning on quitting and moving back down to Virginia where I was from, but I hadn't told anyone yet. My last long weekend was coming up, and I knew it would also be the last of my New Hampshire camping and photography weekends before I told anyone I was leaving. I had a great day. I took tons of great pictures, and just before bed, and just before my camera battery was dying out, I caught a beautiful owl just overhead near my campsite. What a way to end the season. I was pumped, but a little bummed knowing this was my last night out camping, too. I picked up my camera and batteries and stashed them into my pack. I curled into my sleeping bag and watched the fire get smaller and smaller as I fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up, and when I opened my eyes, my camera was directly in front of my face, like inches from me. There was no way I could have missed it. I sat up, not sure what was going on, because I know I had packed it up the night before. I wasn't really worried about theft, but I didn't want it exposed to the elements. I peeled myself out of my tent and sleeping bag and grabbed my camera. It was off, which wasn't a surprise because it had been about to die just before I went to sleep. I pressed the power button. It came on. I scrolled through the gallery and almost threw up. There were tons of pictures of me, my head, my feet, from inside my tent. How is this possible? Who did this? Nobody even knew I was camping. I grabbed my stuff and ran out of there. Whoever had taken those pictures might still be nearby, and I didn't want anything to do with them. I really can't explain how someone did this. I'm not a heavy sleeper, especially when camping. I don't understand why it happened, and I'm not sure I really ever want to know. Straight out of college, I put a deposit down on a lease for a house in Vermont with my boyfriend Tyler. I graduated early, just before the holidays, and our plan was to move in once he had visited his family in Maine. My family was small, and we didn't do a lot for the holidays, so I was free to move in just after New Year's, 2 days ahead of Tyler. I spent the short break packing my stuff and loading up my car. The back seat and passenger seat were full, so I tossed my backpack into the trunk. All my stuff made it hard to see behind me when I was driving the 45 minutes from town, but that was okay. I couldn't wait to get to the new house and start settling in. It would be really nice to have some stuff unpacked by the time Tyler got there in 2 days. The house we had rented was older, small but cozy, nestled in a little clearing next to a big wooded state park area. It was pretty isolated, with the next neighbor being about a mile away, and it was a seasonal rental, so it was likely empty in the dead of winter. When you passed the house, the road ended and our road began. It wasn't paved and was pretty narrow, with woods on both sides. When we checked out the house the first time, this was a big plus. We really liked the idea of being away from everyone, close to the state park, thinking we could hike the trails right out of our back door. A definitely plus after being surrounded by people at school. I had driven just a few miles when it started snowing. It was the soft, dusty kind that didn't stick to the road too badly, so I wasn't too worried. Snow's something you just expect up here. By the time I got to the house, it was just after dusk, and I really started rethinking the idea of coming up alone without Tyler. wasn't scared of the house. Like I said, it was super cozy, but it was just so dark and so quiet. And snow makes everything quieter. And being next to the woods gives you a creepy vibe because you can't see very far through the trees, especially with it snowing. I almost missed the house. It was so dark. If you've ever lived up north, you know the front door isn't the main door you use. The door you use is a side or back door because it leads to what's called a mudroom, which is where you take off your shoes and coat before you go into a house. The house had a driveway that wound around to the back, to that back door, to the mudroom. I could tell the power was on in the house because the back door light was on. It was the yellowy kind that wasn't too bright, and I made a mental note that I needed to get a brighter bulb the next time I went into town. I parked pointed towards the house so I could use the headlights to see the door. I opened my car door and stepped out into the powdery snow. My footsteps crunched as I walked to the trunk to get my backpack. I wanted to be sure I had my phone charger because my phone was dying. I pulled it out of my bag and laid it on my stuff. I quickly grabbed my backpack and took the few short steps to the door. I really had to use the bathroom. The owner said she'd leave the key to the mudroom door under the mat, which is exactly where I found it. This house was pretty small and had a cramped little mudroom with no light on. I opened the door easily and stepped inside. It was pitch black. I slid my hand along the wall to find the switch, and then I felt it. It wasn't very bright, but I could see to make my way to the bathroom. It was clean and empty, but smelled a little stale in there. Not too badly, though. I was thinking of what I'd unpack first as I washed my hands in the super cold water and headed back outside to grab what I wanted to unpack for the night. I reached into my pocket and it was empty. No keys. Then the other pocket, also empty. I looked up and saw the light from the trunk shining brightly out into the night towards the woods. Damn, I must have left the keys with my charger. I rounded the corner of the car, expecting to see my keys and charger where I'd left them. But when I did, all I saw was the trunk open with my stuff still packed inside. But no charger, no keys, and footsteps. There was a line of footsteps that went from the woods straight to my trunk, and another going back into the woods. My footprints should have been the only ones out there. I was alone. My throat tightened and I couldn't breathe. My stomach lurched. I turned and ran back into the house and locked the door. I locked every window and door in that house and sat in that empty house and waited. I heard nothing the first night. Nothing the second night. It was so quiet I couldn't sleep until Tyler got there. Even after he had moved in, I was uncomfortable staying in that house, knowing someone had been watching me and creeping around in the woods. Nothing's happened since, but it's only been 3 weeks. Just before I moved to the West Coast, my family decided to have one last family vacation together before my little sister went to college and I started a new job in California. They planned a week at a cabin close to Pleasant Mountain in Maine. Summer is when Maine is busiest, so we were pretty lucky to score this cabin so close to the mountain trails, even at the end of peak season. Nights were already starting to get chillier, and we knew fall would be here soon, and we'd be moving on to the next stages in our lives. My parents were bummed and loved the idea of putting all the changes on hold, even for a week, but my sister and I couldn't wait. We got to the cabin and settled in. The first couple of days were spent doing all the things you'd expect at a cabin in the woods. We hiked, we roasted marshmallows, and played board games. It was just like when we were kids. On the third morning, I woke up feeling a little strange, really out of it and just not myself. I thought maybe I had gotten a bad night of sleep and just planned to get to bed earlier that night. I couldn't shake the feeling of being off, and I noticed my sister was crashed out on the couch most of the morning too. Maybe we were just coming down with something. I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to be outside. It was a weird feeling of needing to go out there. I still felt foggy and out of it too. My sister saw me putting on my shoes and she got hers on too. I want to go, she said. We stepped outside and both headed in a new direction. We hadn't tried the trail that headed west. It was more overgrown and clearly wasn't used very much. We hiked along in silence. We were both lost in our thoughts. I felt so weird, like dull and empty. I looked at my sister and she looked pale, her mouth drooped open, and she was just staring ahead of her. We hiked on. The woods were thick now, and it was getting darker. I couldn't feel how chilly it had become, but I could see I had goosebumps, and I could see my breath. We kept going in silence. My mind was blank, gray, and empty, but we kept going. Out of nowhere, we were jarred back to the present by a loud gunshot. I looked at my sister and she looked at me. We turned and saw our dad about 20 yards behind us, rifle in hand. He had shot into the night sky. He was running towards us now and flushed, asked, "Why didn't you stop? Where are you going? Why aren't you answering your phones? I've been yelling for you to stop for the last 100 yards. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and there were 12 notifications from both my parents. My sister did the same. The phones weren't silenced or muted. I don't know why we didn't hear them. And why was it so dark? We had just left the cabin. Still out of breath, my dad said, "When you didn't come home after dark, we've been freaked out. You didn't take your gear and it's getting colder. Also, there's a big cliff around here somewhere." Just as he said that, we saw the sign. Just off the trail, overgrown with brush and covered by tree branches, it was a cliff warning sign. Had we kept on hiking, we would have literally walked off the cliff just 15 yards away. We had been in a total fog. Something had pulled us out into the woods and pulled us to the edge of that cliff. If our dad hadn't stopped us, we wouldn't be here to tell the story. Needless to say, we cut our stay short and never went back to that cabin or to those trails.